My daughter and her husband called me ungrateful the night they changed the locks in my own house. That was a Thursday. By the following Monday, I was sitting in a lawyer's office discovering something they had forgotten, or never bothered to learn. 4 days after that, they left me 89 voicemails. I never called back. Let me back up. I spent 34 years working for a steel fabrication company outside of Akron, Ohio. Not management, not engineering. I ran a press brake on the floor, bending sheet metal into brackets and frames and structural components for buildings I'd never see finished. The work was loud and repetitive, and I was good at it. By the time I retired at 62, I had a pension, a modest 401k, and the kind of patience that only comes from decades of standing in one place doing one thing with your hands. My wife Gloria passed from breast cancer 9 years ago. She was 58. We've been married 31 years, and I still reach for her side of the bed sometimes when I wake up in the dark. She was the one who knew how to make a house feel like something. After she was gone, the place we'd owned together in Stowe felt like a building I was just occupying. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a garage where I kept my tools organized in a way that Gloria used to tease me about. Everything labeled. Everything in its place. Our daughter Renee, not the Renee in the file, a different one. My Renee had been talking for about 2 years after the funeral about me moving closer to her. She and her husband Cliff lived in a suburb of Columbus, a newer development with houses that all looked like variations of the same floor plan. They had 2 kids, twin boys, 8 years old at the time. Renee said I was getting older and living alone wasn't sustainable. She said the boys needed their grandfather around. She said it would be good for all of us. What she didn't say, and what I didn't understand until much later, was that they'd been trying to buy a bigger house and couldn't qualify for the loan on their own. In the spring, about 2 years after Gloria died, Renee called and laid it out. There was a house in her neighborhood. 4 bedrooms, which meant 1 for me. The price was $340,000. She and Cliff had been pre-approved for $210,000. They needed someone to co-sign and contribute to the down payment to make it work. She asked if I'd be willing to put in $85,000 from my savings and add my name to the mortgage. She said, "Dad, we want you with us. We want you to have a real home again, not just that empty house in Stowe." I drove down to Columbus the following weekend. Cliff grilled steaks in the backyard, and the boys climbed on me like I was furniture, the way young kids do with people they trust. Renee showed me the bedroom that would be mine. It had its own bathroom and a window that faced east, so I'd get the morning light. She'd already looked up area fishing spots. She said there was a lake 20 minutes away where people said the bass were good in summer. I said yes. I sold the house in Stowe, put the proceeds along with a portion of my retirement savings toward the down payment, and moved into the Columbus house in July. My name was on the mortgage alongside Cliff's. I contributed to the monthly payment. I paid for groceries most weeks. When the hot water heater failed in the second winter, I covered it. When Cliff's car needed transmission work the following spring, they asked if I could loan them $4,000. I did. The first few years were good, or at least good enough that I told myself they were. Sunday dinners, the boys doing homework at the kitchen table, while I watched the news. Fishing trips where Cliff sometimes came along and sometimes didn't, but either way the early mornings on the water felt like the best part of my week. Renee and I had our routines. She'd bring me coffee before she left for work. We'd watch a show together in the evenings sometimes. Somewhere in the 4th or 5th year, things started to shift in a way I could feel but couldn't name. Renee stopped joining me in the evenings. Cliff started responding to things I said with a kind of tight-lipped patience that made me feel like a child being tolerated. I'd noticed them exchanging looks at dinner when I mentioned something about my health, or repeated a story I'd apparently already told. The boys got older and busier, and had less time for their grandfather, which was natural. Except that Renee and Cliff didn't fill that gap. They contracted. By the 7th year, I was eating breakfast alone every morning because Renee and Cliff left early and the boys had school. I ate dinner alone if I cooked it at my usual time because they'd started eating later after I had already cleaned up. I began to feel like a boarder who was gradually being asked to stay in his room. Cliff made a comment once, something about how I kept the television too loud. He said it in front of the boys, and Renee didn't say anything. I turned the volume down and didn't bring it up. Another time I was in the kitchen making a sandwich around noon, and Renee came home unexpectedly for lunch. She looked at me like she'd forgotten I was there, like my presence in my own kitchen was a small surprise she hadn't prepared for. She recovered quickly and was perfectly pleasant, but I saw it. That fraction of a second before her face arranged itself, I started keeping track, the way you do when you're retired and have time to notice things. Little moments. Small adjustments I was making to take up less space. I stopped using the living room when they were home. I stopped asking if anyone wanted me to cook. I stopped suggesting we do things as a family on weekends. Every time I retreated a little, nothing was said. No one acknowledged it, which was its own kind of message. The mortgage had about 14 months left when things came to a head. I'd been planning a fishing trip up to Lake Erie with a man named Douglas, a friend I'd made at the community center in Stowe years ago. We'd kept in touch and fished together a few times since I moved. The trip was 5 days. Nothing fancy. A rental cabin and good water, and enough quiet to think clearly. I told Renee and Cliff about it at dinner 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave. Renee nodded and said, "That sounds nice, Dad." Cliff didn't say anything. I was gone Monday through Friday. Douglas and I caught more perch than we knew what to do with, found a diner that served good eggs, and talked mostly about fishing and a little about everything else. I came home Friday evening feeling more like myself than I had in a long time. The driveway was empty when I pulled in. Both their cars were gone, which was odd for a Friday evening. I got out and noticed my toolbox sitting at the end of the driveway. Then I noticed the cardboard boxes on the front walkway. Then I noticed that most of what was in the boxes was mine. I stood there for a moment before my mind would process it. My work jackets were folded into one box, not carefully. A second box held books and some papers. A plastic bin had been used for the things from my bathroom. Toiletries and prescriptions mixed in together. My good dress shoes, the pair I'd bought for Gloria's funeral and worn to church a handful of times since, were sitting on top of a trash bag full of what looked like clothing. I could see one of Gloria's photo albums sticking out of a box on its side. The corner of it had gotten wet from the sprinkler that must have run that morning. I picked up the photo album first. The cover was damp, and the spine had softened. I set it carefully on the hood of my truck. Then I tried my key. The key turned a quarter turn and stopped. New lock, not my key anymore. I sat down on the front step and called Renee. It went to voicemail. I called Cliff. Voicemail. I tried Renee again and left a message that I was trying hard to keep level. Dad's home. I don't know what's happening. Please call me. My neighbor across the street, a retired postal worker named Eugene, who had always been friendly, came out to check his mail and saw me sitting there. He looked at the boxes and looked at me and then looked at the ground. I called over and asked if he knew anything. He said he didn't want to get in the middle of family business. He went back inside. An hour passed. The evening got cooler. I carried the photo albums and the most important papers to my truck. I found a metal box at the bottom of one of the cardboard boxes that held Gloria's mother's watch, the one we'd always planned to give to Renee when she got married, which we did, and which Renee had apparently decided was mine to take when they cleared me out. I held it for a minute. The crystal wasn't broken. I put it in the glove compartment. Their car came around the corner at 7:15. Renee got out first. She was still in her work clothes, and she didn't look at me when she came around to get bags from the back seat. Cliff got out of the driver's side and stood by the car with his hands in his pockets. I walked toward them. I said, "Renee, what is going on?" She finally looked at me. Her face was the face of someone who has made a decision and is now experiencing the discomfort of having to follow through on it. Not cruelty exactly. Something worse. Resolution. She said, "Dad, we talked about this. We didn't talk about this. We've been trying to talk about it for 2 years." Her voice was careful and practiced. "You need your own space. We need our space. We need our space. This isn't working. This is my house," I said. "My name is on the mortgage." Cliff spoke for the first time. "The mortgage is almost paid off," he said. 2 more payments. We figured it was easier to do this now before things get any more complicated. I looked at him. He looked at the driveway. Easier for who? I said. Renee said, we're not doing this in the driveway. She picked up the grocery bags and walked toward the house, using a key I'd never seen before to open the front door. Cliff followed her. The door closed. I stood in my own driveway with my belongings stacked on the walkway, and the new lock on the door and the light in the kitchen going on, as they started making dinner inside. I didn't bang on the door. I didn't call the police. The later that night, I thought about all the reasons I should have. Instead, I loaded what mattered into my truck with the same methodical attention I'd given to every job I'd ever worked. Gloria's photos. The metal box. My tools, which were good tools and had taken years to collect. The papers from the bathroom bin, which included my insurance cards, my pension statements, and a folder I kept for important documents, because 40 years of working in a factory teaches you that paper matters. I drove to a Hampton Inn 6 miles away and paid for one night. The room was clean and quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the folder of documents I'd brought in from the truck. I opened it. The mortgage papers were there. The original documents from when we'd signed 8 years ago. I read them the way I used to read technical drawings at work, slowly and without assumptions. My name appeared as the primary borrower. Cliff's name appeared as co-borrower. The property deed, which I'd requested a copy of at closing because I was that kind of person, listed me first. I read it twice. Then I read the section about primary borrower rights. I didn't sleep much that night. I found a real estate attorney named William Forsythe at 9 the next morning. His office was downtown, 2 floors above a dry cleaner, and the receptionist let me in when I explained I had a property matter that needed immediate attention. Forsythe was in his mid-50s, with reading glasses on a cord around his neck and the unhurried manner of a man who had heard complicated stories before. I put the documents on his desk and explained the situation without editorializing. He read for about 8 minutes without speaking. Then he said, "Mr." and he said my name. "You are the primary borrower, and, according to this deed, the primary title holder of this property. Your daughter and son-in-law are listed as co-borrowers on the mortgage, but they hold no independent title claim. They have, in effect, been residing in your property." I asked him to say it plainly. "It's your house," he said. "It has been your house since the day you signed. They change the locks on a property they have no legal authority over. As the title holder, you have the right to demand they vacate. If they refuse, you can pursue formal eviction proceedings, which, given the ownership structure, would move fairly quickly." I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked him about selling. He said there was no obstacle to listing the property. I would need to navigate the co-bor situation on the mortgage, but since there were only 2 payments remaining, he suggested we discuss a payoff approach. He could help me send formal notice to Renee and Cliff establishing my ownership and giving them a window to vacate, legally documented. "What window do I have to give them?" I asked. "Legally, 30 days. You could offer more." "That's your choice." I authorized him to send the notice. On the way back to the Hampton Inn, I stopped at a real estate office I'd passed and asked to speak with an agent. The woman who came to the front desk was named Audra, sharp and professional, maybe 40 years old, and she didn't waste time when I explained what I needed. She looked up the property on her computer. She said the neighborhood had appreciated considerably in 8 years. She estimated the house would list between $395,000 and $415,000, depending on condition. She said in the current market, a serious buyer could be identified within 2 weeks. I signed the listing agreement that afternoon. The notice from Forsythe's office was delivered to the house by certified mail the following Tuesday. I know this because Forsythe's assistant called to confirm receipt. What happened next, I only know from the voicemails, which I did listen to. All 89 of them, sitting in a lawn chair on the small patio of an extended stay apartment I'd rented in a complex near the highway. I listened to them in the evenings like a kind of documentary, a record of a particular kind of reckoning. The first ones were angry. Cliff's voice, hard and controlled. "This is our home. You cannot do this. We will get a lawyer. Call me back immediately." Then Renee, who sounded less like my daughter and more like someone reading from a script she'd prepared. Dad, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Please call me so we can discuss this like adults. By day 3, the tone had shifted. Cliff again, less controlled now. The realtor showed up with photographers. Renee told her we hadn't authorized anything. The realtor showed us paperwork. I don't understand how this is possible. Please, just call me back. Renee, voice thinner. Dad, I know you're upset. I know we could have handled things better. Please don't do this to us. By the end of the first week, they had apparently contacted a lawyer of their own, because there was a voicemail from an attorney's office requesting a call. I relayed that to Forsyth, who communicated back through the appropriate channels that the property situation was clear and the listing would proceed. The voicemails kept coming. Renee, toward the end of the second week, sounding like she hadn't slept. Dad, the boys are asking where you are. They don't understand what's happening. Please, we'll pay rent. Whatever you want. Just tell us what you want. Cliff, raw and stumbling now in a way I'd never heard from him. I know I was wrong. We were both wrong. I don't know what else to say. Please just answer the phone. I didn't answer. Part of me wanted to. That part of me is the part that spent 34 years making sure everything was in its right place. The part that still reaches for Gloria's side of the bed. The part that moved to Columbus in the first place because being useful to people you love feels like enough of a reason to keep going. But another part of me had been keeping track for 3 years of small retreats and averted eyes, and the way they'd looked when they thought I wasn't watching. They had done the math. They had decided I was worth less than the inconvenience of having me around. They'd made that calculation quietly and carefully, and then they'd executed it while I was catching perch with my friend Douglas on Lake Erie. People who do that with deliberation don't deserve the benefit of sudden regret. The house sold in 18 days. A couple named. I'll just say they were young, maybe 30, with a toddler and a dog and the kind of excitement about the place that makes you remember what a house is actually supposed to feel like. The wife asked me at closing why I was selling. I told her the simple version. She squeezed my hand and said they were going to take good care of it. I believed her. The closing check was $418,500. Renee and Cliff had 30 days from the legal notice to vacate. They were gone by day 22. I know because Forsyth's office confirmed it with the new owners. I didn't see them leave. I was in South Carolina by then. I'd driven down the first week of October with my truck loaded and no particular timeline in mind. A man I'd worked with years ago had retired to a small town on the coast near Beaufort, and had mentioned more than once that the fishing there was different, slower, and warmer, and that there were affordable rentals if you knew where to look. I called him, and he said, "Come on down." And I did. The house I rented was a small place on a tidal creek. Wood-sided, screened porch, smelled like salt and warm air when I opened the windows. It was exactly the kind of place Gloria would have wanted to spend a week's vacation. And I'd spend the first evening on the porch, thinking about that. About her. About the 31 years that felt more real to me than almost anything that had come after. I set her photo on the windowsill next to my chair. I set her mother's watch on the small shelf by the door, which is where meaningful things go in a house you're trying to make your own. I called Douglas and told him where I was. He said he'd come down in February when the Ohio winter got to be too much. I said there'd be a chair on the porch for him. About 6 weeks after I'd settled in, I got a letter forwarded through Forsyth's office. It was from Renee. Handwritten. 4 pages. The kind of letter that takes effort. She talked about the years we'd had when things were good. She talked about the boys asking for me. She said she and Cliff were renting an apartment, and that it was smaller than they were used to, but that they were managing. She said she understood if I didn't want to respond, but that she wanted me to know she was sorry. Not for one thing, but for all of it. I read it twice. I didn't write back right away. I thought about it for a few weeks, sitting on the porch in the evenings watching the light change over the creek. I thought about what Gloria would have said. She was better at forgiveness than I am. She would have found some middle path, some way to hold people accountable without closing the door entirely. Eventually, I wrote a short letter back. Not warm and not cold. I told Renee I'd received her letter. I told her I wasn't ready to pretend the last year hadn't happened, but that I wasn't interested in spending the rest of my life being angry either. I told her the boys could call me when they wanted to. I told her that if she and I were going to rebuild anything, it would have to be slowly and honestly, and that I'd be the one deciding the pace. I sealed it and mailed it, and then went fishing. The creek was quiet that morning. A great blue heron stood in the shallows about 40 yards downstream, perfectly still, watching the water the way I've been trying to learn to watch things. Patient, not hoping too hard. Ready to move when the moment arrives and content to wait until it does. I didn't catch much that day. Didn't matter. Some people go their whole lives building something, a savings account, a pension, a reputation for showing up, and then hand it over to the people they love, trusting that love will make it mean something. Sometimes it does. Sometimes you discover that what you built is still yours, regardless of who was living on top of it. The heron stood there until I reeled in my line and started walking back. Then it lifted off without any particular urgency, wide wings catching the air, and was gone. I walked home to my rented house in the creek, made coffee, and called Douglas to confirm February. There was nowhere else I needed to be. I've been sitting on this porch for 3 weeks now, watching the tide come in and go out on the creek behind this little rented house, and I keep coming back to the same thought. Not about Renee, not about Cliff, not even about the money. I keep thinking about how long I let things slide. How many mornings I ate breakfast alone and told myself it was just a season. How many times I turned the television down without being asked twice, without anyone saying thank you, without even expecting them to. I made myself smaller, 1 inch at a time, and I called it love. That's the part nobody warns you about. It's not the big betrayal that does the damage. It's the 100 small moments before it, where you notice something is wrong and you decide not to see it clearly. I'm not saying I was naive. I'm saying I chose comfort over honesty, and I paid for that choice in years. What I understand now, on the other side of all of it, is that actions compound. The way money compounds in an account. The way rust spreads if you don't catch it early. Every time Cliff dismissed something I said, and I let it pass, that became the permission for the next dismissal. Every time Renee looked through me, and I made excuses for her, I was teaching them both that my presence had no real weight. They didn't wake up one morning and decide to throw me up. They arrived at that decision slowly, one small lesson at a time. And I was the one doing the teaching. That's a hard thing to sit with. It took me a while to sit with it, honestly. But here's the other side of it. The same way that passivity compounds, so does clarity. The night I sat in that Hampton Inn room with the mortgage papers spread across the bed, something shifted in me that I don't know how to describe except to say it felt like waking up in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I had spent 8 years being useful and grateful and accommodating, and all of it, every payment, every repair, every Sunday dinner, had been building something real, something with legal weight and financial substance that no amount of dismissiveness could erase. They had forgotten that a man who works 34 years with his hands and keeps his documents in a folder knows the difference between what's said and what's signed. Intelligence isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about paying attention to what's actually in front of you, not what you wish was there. I paid attention, eventually. Later than I should have, but not too late. And the courage it took, because it did take courage, wasn't the dramatic kind. It wasn't confrontation. It was quieter than that. It was deciding not to answer the phone when every instinct from 30 years of fatherhood was telling me to pick up and fix it. It was driving to South Carolina with a truck full of tools and glorious photo, and nothing else resolved, trusting that I had done what was right, and that the rest would settle itself without my supervision. Renee wrote me a letter eventually. 4 pages handwritten. I read it twice. I haven't decided yet what we are to each other going forward, and I've made my peace with not knowing. Some things take the time they take. What I know is this. The heron standing in the shallows doesn't chase the fish. It stands still, sees clearly, and moves when the moment is right. I spent too many years running after things that were already mine, trying to earn what I'd already built. I don't intend to make that mistake again.